Hey everyone, welcome to the Mental Playbook with Christine Dalgity. We're here to chat about all things mental health, share some awesome stories, educate, and advocate to break stigmas and gain power through knowledge for all ages and walks of life, and give you the tools you need to boost your mental game. So grab a coffee, get comfy, tune in, get inspired, and let's dive into some fascinating conversations. Remember, your mind is super powerful, and with the right tools and knowledge, you can master your mental playbook. And while you're doing that, take care of you. Hey everybody, Christine here. Welcome back to the Mental Playbook with Christine Dalgity. Today is a space for honest conversations about caregiving, emotional labor, and the messiness of being human. I'm a psychotherapist, obviously, but I'm also someone who had to learn daily how to hold both love and exhaustion in the same breath. And when I was given this topic today, well, not given the topic today, but when I was given this topic for today's podcast, and I was reflecting on my journey, I was reflecting on times when I found myself rescheduling work and personal things, my own role and navigating that role of daughter and mom or grandmother, while trying to ensure that my mom, when at one point in my life when I was 33, and then my dad at another point in my life when I was 52, were being taken care of. I remembered times that at the end of the day, when I finally got home to go to bed, I hadn't eaten lunch. I couldn't remember if I peed that day. And I was thinking, I haven't even taken a breath today. And also, reflecting on that in my own life and reflecting on my clients' lives, anyone that's going through what we're going to talk about today, I realized that is the mental load. It's a mental load that we carry. And this is what we're going to talk about today. So if you're caring for aging parents or even just beginning to think about what that might be like, this episode's for you. We're diving into the invisible emotional labor, the guilt, the shifting roles, and hopefully trying to find some grace in all of it as well. If you want to dive into this with me, stay with me. And I'm also going to share some ways that you can try to balance some of this. And I know that, sometimes people might be thinking, holy, like your podcasts are really heavy. And I'm a psychotherapist and I do heavy, right? But I also don't want it to all be heavy. So I want to share my experiences, both personally and as a psychotherapist. And I'm not going to say to you, oh no, it's great. You move through it. That's toxic positivity. And if you're following me, I've talked a lot about toxic positivity, but there is some grace in it. And there are parts that you can reflect on and say, wow, that was probably one of the best moments of my life. Or I am so glad I had that moment. So I am going to talk a little bit about that too. All right, so let's start with the mental load. As a psychotherapist, I see a lot of people carrying this invisible backpack. So I use the backpack analogy a lot in therapy, just given different situations. So maybe it's, trauma or relationships or mental health issues like anxiety, depression, stress, anything, work. I use this invisible backpack analogy, and we put rocks in this backpack of all different sizes given the situation. And sometimes, we just keep putting the rocks in, throwing them back there, and eventually that backpack gets too heavy to carry. And it could take a pebble thrown into the backpack that just topples us over. And that's burnout. And whether it's, personal burnout, work burnout, caregiver burnout is a real thing. And so many of my clients carry that backpack around. And I carried it, the caregiver one, as well, twice in my life. So the mental load isn't just all about tasks, right? It's all those thoughts swirling around constantly, sometimes about the tasks, but it's the remembering, the anticipating, the worrying, the Googling mobility aids at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's wondering if your dad took his meds while you're sitting in a work meeting. It's wondering, did I do the right thing putting dad in assisted living? Or for my family, for us, it was, did we do the right thing supporting dad in wanting to stay home and live out his last days at home? Were we doing the right thing? Am I missing signs of mom's memory loss? What if something happens and I'm not there? You're thinking about their safety, their happiness, their dignity. That was big for my mom. She wanted to stay home, but she also wanted to keep her dignity. And sometimes you're wondering if you're doing enough. The mental load also includes emotional labor. So you're trying to hold space for your parents' fears, their hopes, and sometimes stubbornness, while also processing your own emotions about aging, maybe, and loss and change. And, stubbornness, my father, Dalgity's were known for being stubborn. I often say, we learned from the best. And my father was probably one of the most stubborn men. And during our journey of caring for him, there were days I wanted to shake him and hug him all at the same time. It's really difficult to try to do what's best for them, and they're not feeling well, and they're grumpy. They want things a certain way. They don't want the change, and you're trying not to be their parent. You're their child. But stubbornness can be really hard to manage while still being caring and not, coming across as, oh, just do it. I remember my sister said, my dad would get in these things where it'd be like, no. Everything we said, no. So one day my sister said to my dad, one morning, she's like, you know what, Dad? Today we're going to have a yes day. Everything's going to be yes. And I was sitting back kind of chuckling, and he just looked at her and he goes, no. And it wasn't a yes day. You might notice that your own self-care starts to slip. You are so focused on their care that your own self-care goes to the end of the list. Your needs go to the end of the list. And if you are also, what I'm going to talk about, most people don't just have a parent to care for. So if you are also juggling other things in your life, that often slips too, which then impacts your mental health as well. So if this sounds familiar, it's absolutely normal, but it's also very exhausting. And if you're a caregiver by profession, then this load feels doubled because you are making space for the people that you serve. It doesn't have to be a therapist like me. It could be anyone who's in a caregiver profession. You're holding space for others while trying to hold space for your family life, your parents, your kids, your siblings, whatever it may be, your partner. And it's a lot. So here's something that I tell my clients often, and I remind myself of often as well. You're not failing. You're juggling a lot. You're trying to figure it all out. You're trying to do what's best for many different people. You are doing what you can. So you're not failing. You're human. And as much as we like to think that we're superhumans, we're not. We're just human. So what can help? Today, I'm also going to do something a little bit differently. Instead of doing like a segment at the end about strategies to help, I'm just going to kind of like weave them into each segment that I'm doing. So, and then I do have one, like just a couple extras. What can I do to help? Try to externalize this load. Take it off of you. When I'm talking to children about anxiety and stuff, we talk about the anxiety or the worry bully or when I'm talking to adult clients even, I won't say your anxiety, I'll say the anxiety part of your brain or the anxiety brain or the anxiety, because when we say, my mental load or my anxiety, then we own it. Then it's part of us. So try to externalize that. write about it, get it out, write a letter to it, right? Tell it off, separate yourself from it. Record a voice memo. I do that sometimes. And either in my notes, I'll just kind of write down I'll talk about how I'm feeling. Sometimes I will do a voice memo of like, as if I'm talking to somebody. I just need to get it out. And so you can do that to the mental load too. Just like, blah, right? What do they call that? Word vomit, right? Just blah, get it all out. And then you can delete it after, but it's not part of you. Externalize it. Create micro boundaries. This one can be hard. And I want to express my experience. Well, I kind of have dual experiences in this. My mom was young and was ill. She was diagnosed with ALS when she was 60. My oldest brother is going to be 60 next month. Just to, now that perspective for me is like, what? My dad then, we kind of, especially once COVID hit, but my dad was 82 when he passed. So it was 20 years in between. So my life was completely different, the roles, but also we did care for him through the aging process, but then through illness. So I'm kind of covering all. So when I say some of these, if your parent is ill, very ill, then you might not do some of these. If your parent is aging, I do have clients that their parent is aging and they have dementia. And so they will call them 8 times a day because they don't remember calling them, or they will be there, go to work, and then they get phone calls from their parents saying, I haven't seen you in forever. So I'm saying, obviously gear some of these strategies to your present situation. And so one of them is, maybe don't check your phone for family updates during a meeting. For me, because my dad was sick, I would tell my clients, I have a watch. So I just glance down, my dad's ill. And if it's his number on my phone or my sister, my siblings, then I may have to read it or I may have to. And all of my clients were so understanding of that because that was a little bit different. I'm not going to ignore a text from my sister when I know she went to check on my dad, right? But all my clients were good for that. But if it was one of the situations I mentioned about you just got to work, don't check for family updates, maybe, right? Or block off 1 hour a week. That's just you time. Go for a walk, read a book. And I know 1 hour a week sounds like, are you kidding me? That's it. And I always go to the minimum amount, right? What do you know you can do? If you can block off a day, if you can block off, more than that, then of course do that. But if you can even manage to block off an hour a day, a week, an hour a day would be super, but an hour a week, then even small shifts can create more breathing room for you. So those are just some strategies to try to, other than the common ones like your self-care, making sure that you are trying to get enough sleep, eating nutrient-dense foods, and trying to move as much as you can. The next thing I want to talk about is I hear a lot. Guilt, the guilt spiral, right? I hear that in every session, mostly, but when it comes to caregiving, let's talk about guilt. It can be sneaky. It shows up when you say no, when you feel resentment, when you want space, when you don't want space, and then wonder if that's unhealthy. You just want to be there all the time. And then you're wondering, whoa, that can't be healthy. Am I being, dependent on this need? And you start the guilt spiral with that. Guilt pops up for so many reasons. Maybe you're feeling guilty because you live far away and you can't get to your parent all the time. Or because you wish you had more patience. I can guarantee you that your patience runs thin, and it's never, for me, my patience, losing my patience and stuff, never lost it with my parents, but I wasn't angry or resentful of them. I was angry and resentful of what was happening, what they were going through, what we were all going through. Or maybe, the guilt spiral starts because you're just tired and you secretly wish for a break. And I want to touch upon that a little bit because I hear that all the time and I experienced it. This guilt cycle, guilt spiral on, you're exhausted, absolutely exhausted. And all you can think of is, I just need this to stop. I just want this break. But that means they're gone. And so you know that, okay, but I'm going to get a break when they're not here anymore. So that makes me selfish to think that, like, they have to die for me to get a break. That's stupid. That's selfish. No, that's human. You're exhausted. You don't want your parent to die. Not once. I would do anything to have both of them here right now. Not once do you want your parent to die. You're tired. So remind yourself of that. And I remind all of my clients of that because they all say it. I want a break. I'm exhausted, but like, I'm horrible. I'm horrible to think that. No, you're human and you're tired. But that guilt is real. So feel it and then process it. There's guilt for not doing enough. Guilt for doing too much. Guilt for not feeling grateful every second of every day. That they're still here, that I can be doing this, that toxic positivity. Sometimes guilt comes from family expectations or from comparing yourself to friends or other people that maybe you see on social media that seem to have everything together. Spoiler alert, they don't. It just appears that way. There's, guilt about your own aging because right now, I'm talking my perspective, and clients' perspective, but some of the clients that are taking care of their parents are also in their 60s, 70s. Parents, they could be 100 years old, the parent, or in their 90s. And so you're aging, you don't have as much energy to put into it. You think that, you're feeling like you should be invincible. And for some of my clients, there's a regret of missing opportunities because they were too busy with their own lives or the relationship with their parent was strained. For me, not with my dad so much, but with my mom, because I was 34 when she passed. And mother-daughter relationships sometimes are tough, right? And the night before she passed, she, as I said, had ALS, so she couldn't talk very well, and she was in and out of consciousness, but she kind of was alert. She came to and she was alert that night, and we had probably one of our best conversations the night before. I told her that I was sorry for all the times I made her cry. So that for me was probably one of my biggest regrets. And she just looked at me. She called me Angel Girl. She just said, "Oh, Angel Girl, that's part of being a mom." Right. And then I remember my son was 12 or 13 when my mom died. And I remember a few years later dealing with a teenager. And I just kind of looked up and I was like, I get it now, as I was sitting there on the verge of tears. Right. So although I regretted that, I mean, even one of the last things my mom said to me was making me feel better, right? So you will have some regrets in those moments. And if you have the opportunity to discuss them, that's amazing. But you feel guilty about things. That seems to be what we do, right? This guilt is tangled up in like cultural and familial expectations. In some families, saying no is betrayal. And there's this myth that, myth of the good child, the one who never says no, the one who never complains, the one who always shows up. And when you are that good child, right, the whole family depends on that. And I have a lot of clients that talk about that it's expected. I have some clients where they have 3-4 siblings and they're the only girl, the only woman. And so it's expected. That was just their role, right? Her role. And growing up was to take care of everything. And so now and she always did. She always showed up. So now, one client in particular wanted to go on vacation and was like, oh, well, I have this and this and this to do with my mom. And I said, okay, but you have 4 brothers. And it was like, oh, well, but it's just what I do. And so we had to discuss a discussion on boundaries and not being the good child all the time. You have that role, but that doesn't mean you have to keep that role. And there was guilt. There was guilt about going on vacation. There was guilt about not being the good child and making her brothers do some of the things, the appointments, the check-ins, that sort of thing. Guilt is a sign that you care in this situation. It means that, if you're having all these feelings and you're feeling guilt for them, it means that that relationship matters deeply to you, that you don't want your parent to feel that way, or you don't want those regrets, or, you have those regrets. It means that that relationship matters that much to you. But guilt isn't always about morality. Sometimes it's about grief. It is grief. And, grief for the relationship you used to have with the parent, grief for the ease that's gone. Things used to be a lot easier and now they're hard. Grief for the version of yourself that didn't have to carry this much weight. And there's also something called anticipatory grief. And when we know, so it can be either, if your parent is sick, ALS is fatal. There's no, when you're diagnosed with it, you know what the outcome is going to be. And that's a whole other thing that I could do a whole podcast on, but you already begin to grieve the loss. That's anticipatory grief. As our parents age and we start to get older too, and we see them changing and becoming more frail and depending on us more, there's anticipatory grief because we see those changes. We know that there's an ending. It kind of slaps us in the face, right? Your mortality, but mortality slaps you in the face. And so there's anticipatory grief. And there's also this anticipatory grief about this person who's in front of you, who has been your constant your whole life, who, you have seen as invincible. You see as, I don't know, like my dad was my hero, right? He was what I measured all men to. I used to joke with him that that's why I was still single, because no one measured up to him. And he'd say, yeah, you just keep thinking that. My dad was a little bit sarcastic. That's where we all get it from. But you see this person that, you're going to lose. And so you start to grieve that. And that's anticipatory. You're already anticipating the grief at the end of your caregiving journey, I guess is how I can sum that up. So what helps? This guilt spiral. Let's reframe guilt to grief. Let yourself mourn what's changed. Don't feel guilty about feeling what you're feeling, about that process. Let yourself mourn it. Things have changed. Practice self-compassion. I talk about this all the time, that inner critic that says, how could you think that way? What? You're not doing enough. You're thinking too much about this. You're not doing this. Practice some self-compassion. Try a mantra like, I'm doing the best I can with what I have today. And use parts work. So that is a therapeutic thing that we do, parts work. So talk to the part of you that feels guilty. And ask yourself, what is this guilt trying to protect? It's probably the grief it's trying to protect, but there could be other things. What is this guilt trying to protect? Why is it coming out? Sometimes you'll be surprised with what you find in that. The other thing I want you to do, again, toxic positivity, push it aside, be grateful, sit with it, feel it, acknowledge it, name it, process it, cry, get angry. Feel exactly what you're feeling. Allow yourself to feel it and acknowledge it, and then work through it, move through it. I've said many times, we don't get over things. We work through them. We move through them. Write an undeliverable letter to your parent. I actually wrote a letter to my mom. We found out she had ALS in March. And for Mother's Day in May, I didn't know what to give her. I didn't know what to do. And so I wrote her a letter, exactly how I was feeling about things and the fears I had. And because I know that my mom was a mom first and foremost, and she said to us, I'm still your mother, and I'm sick, but I'm still your mother. Don't stop coming to me. And so I wrote her a letter exactly how I was feeling. And then at the end of it, I wrote the words to the song, Because You Love Me by Celine Dion. And unbeknownst to me and the rest of the family, my mom picked that song for her funeral to sing back to us, and had my cousin sing it. So at the time, I was like, so not cool, Mom. Obviously, that letter meant something to her. And so I did that. I wrote her a letter. But if you're trying to process everything and you have the guilt, write an undeliverable letter with everything you're feeling and everything you want to say, because you're not going to give it to them, but you get it out, and it's like you're saying it to them. Your fears, your anger, your resentment of this, what's going through. And again, that was illness. If your parent is aging and your role has changed with that parent, you can still write a letter about that. And another thing you can do is write a letter to yourself from your future self afterwards. And that might be really hard to come up with because you don't know what to expect, but try to imagine something. Imagine yourself in a sense of peace. Imagine how you want to be in the future, and write a letter to that person, encouraging you now, encouraging, and keep holding on what life's going to be like. Caregiving doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's not just about what you're doing. It's not just about the caregiving. It affects everything. It affects your romantic relationships, your friendships, your work. If you're in the sandwich generation, which I want to talk about in a second because I was really thinking about that. If you're in the sandwich generation, meaning you're caring for children and parents, it can affect that. It can affect your parent-child relationship and your relationship with your parent or parents. If both your parents are aging, that could be something too. The sandwich generation. I was thinking about that when I was preparing for the podcast, and I think that most people. So to explain, when I was caring for my mom, my son was 12 when she was diagnosed. He was 13 when she passed. And I was a solo mom, right? Or a solo parent. And so I was trying to care for him, care for my mom. And, going back to the guilt a little bit too, in that sandwich generation and the relationship, I would feel guilty that I wasn't there for him enough he was in a lot of sports and everything. So if I had to get parents to take him to sports and then get there. And then I felt guilty if I wasn't with my mom because I was with him. So that's sandwich generation. But then this is what I was thinking about. But he's all grown up now. But I was still in the sandwich generation, which technically, that's not what they call the sandwich generation, but it's small children. But I was still in the sandwich generation because my relationship was strained with my son when I was taking care of my dad because I wasn't there for him like I normally was. And then I also had my grandchildren, and I didn't see them as much, and I wasn't there for them as much either. And all of that changed. It really strained the relationship, and I felt it. And so there was guilt with that too. And I know he felt it too, because we had a bit of a discussion about it. So sandwich generation doesn't have to be typically what they say. It's any time you're feeling in the middle. I guess I'm out of it now because both my parents are gone, but anytime you're caregiving like that, it doesn't matter how old your kids are, right? Because your relationship with them changes. And your relationship with your parent or your parents. I had a client say to me, no, I try to be very cognizant that I'm not my mom's parent. I'm her daughter, and I need to be aware of that. And I said, but the thing is, you can tell yourself that, but parentification occurs when the child starts to parent the parent. That's called parentification. And that occurs, especially if your parent has dementia or Alzheimer's. And so I said to her, also cut yourself some slack if you have to parent a little bit, right? You want to keep your mom's dignity. And I remember with my dad too, there was a little bit of parentification. I mean, he didn't have dementia or anything, but his stubbornness, there were times where my sister and I, oxygen, my dad couldn't breathe and he refused to have oxygen. Stubborn. I don't want those tanks in here, because he thought it was like the old fashioned tank. Finally, it got to a point where I just called the oxygen people, and my sister told dad that they were coming the next day, because it happened really fast. We thought we'd have time to prepare him, that they were coming the next day. And he was mad, and it was like a child. He would just looked at my sister, and then he got really quiet and he wouldn't talk. And he said, I don't want it. And she said, well, if you want to stay home, you want us to keep you home, you need to help us help you. And oxygen is part of that. And they're coming tomorrow. And then she said, what do you want for lunch? And so that was like a parenting type role that she had to take on. With my client too, it's like, just acknowledge that you can still be the kid, the daughter, the son. Your role changes, and there is some full circle stuff that happens, and you do have to parent a little bit. So even that, in itself within the relationship changes. And then there's sibling dynamics. Oof. With both of my parents, obviously we were at different stages and ages of life, 20 years apart. And I'm not going to talk about my siblings or what we went through or the dynamics there, just generally speaking. So what I'm about to say isn't necessarily about my siblings. This stuff happens, and it's also stories that clients have told me, but the whole sibling dynamic that happens can be a whole podcast or a whole episode in itself as well. But maybe you're the one doing most of it, most of the caregiving. Or maybe there's 2 or 3 siblings and the rest aren't doing anything. And maybe your siblings avoid everything about it. And maybe, you and your siblings are trying and you just still feel disconnected. There are so many things that can happen in the dynamics with siblings. And sometimes, it brings you closer together, this shared responsibility, shared fear. Sometimes it builds resentment. Sometimes it ends relationships with your siblings. Sometimes, at the end of it, it's like, obviously, even when my family, sibling dynamics there was difficulties because everyone's feeling their emotions. But at the end of it, we were all just, when my dad passed, we were there together, and we all came back to my house together, and we spent the next few days together. Because for me, there was only 3 other people in this world who were feeling somewhat what I was feeling in that moment. And so everything that we went through during the caregiving time didn't matter anymore. And it was just about being the people mom and dad raised us to be. So kind of going off a little bit, but it is part of the process. Absolutely part of the growth and change in caregiving when you have siblings. And then it makes you think, like for me, I have one child. And so then afterwards I was thinking, whoa, like he's going to have to go through this by himself. Not by himself, because he does have a spouse and stuff. For those who are the responsible one, there's loneliness in that, of being the responsible one, the one who is, remembers the appointments, tracks the meds, handles the crises. And just to add to that, just a different perspective that just made me think, I had a client situation where this client was upset because their sibling, it's all about perspective too, because the client said that them and their sibling were doing stuff with the parent as well. But then the other sibling was upset because they thought that they were the only one doing everything. They were the responsible one. And my client was like, we're all doing things. Why do they think they're the only one, right? So it is a perspective thing. And I think it depends if, one sibling might not have children and they're still doing things, but then another sibling has 3 or 4 children and they feel like they're doing more because they're trying, they're navigating parenting as well. So it's all about perspective too in that situation. So what helps? Schedule time with loved ones that's not about caregiving. No updates, no venting, just connection. And that is something as well that I'm not a negative person. I'm a pretty positive person. Do I get upset and negative sometimes? Absolutely. I'm human. But yeah, I mean, I'm not someone who's moody or anything like that usually. And I was so tired and strained and exhausted and fill in the blank. And I didn't even realize part of the strain with my relationship with my son during taking care of my dad was that. And, I'm also a psychotherapist. And so I was taking on a lot of heavy with clients, which that's fine. That's what I do. But then carrying my own heavy and hearing everyone else's problems and just keeping mine in. And I didn't want to share it with my siblings because they were going through it too. Although my sister and I bounced off each other a lot, and my friends, when I was with them, I just, and so I didn't even realize how negative I was when I was with my son, how I was like always talking about what was going on with Pop, my dad, and everything about that until he finally said, "Mom, I'm not your therapist." My son likes to say it like it is. And, and he was like, every time you come here, it's just negative. And he wasn't used to that so much. So that was part of the strain. So, it really hit home with me that, and I still do it sometimes, but I try to really be just not using it as a sounding board, trying to have some of these connections. Obviously, I need to talk to someone too, but have these connections where it's just like, whew, that's what you need. No venting, no negativity, just connection. Do fun things. Communicate clearly. Instead of saying, I'm drowning, say, I need help with X or Y. Communicate it. And because also, some people don't even say I'm drowning, right? They don't say anything and they just carry it, that backpack. So communicate it. Let it out. Tell people how you're feeling. Ask for help. And please normalize therapy for caregivers. It's okay to talk to somebody while you're going through it and not waiting until you break. So normalize that. If you know somebody who's a caregiver, it's not a sign of weakness to have someone to vent to. Even if that's what the therapy part is for you, is to get it all out. There's a meme, cartoon, drawing thing that I've seen on social media that I love, and I'm going to get it as a picture for my office. And it is a therapist and a client, and the thought bubble above the client is like yarn everywhere, tangled up. And the thought bubble above the therapist is the yarn in a ball, right? So you may be feeling all over the place and your therapist has a helicopter view and they're not emotionally invested, and they can provide some of these strategies that I'm talking to you about right now. So there's this paradox. Caregiving is both a burden and it's a privilege. It's hard, it's beautiful, and it's heartbreaking, and it's sacred. It's such a paradox. There's some days where you feel resentful, and other days you feel deeply connected, and most days you feel both of them. So how do we find meaning in all of this? Look for small moments of grace. A shared laugh, a quiet hug, a memory that surfaces unexpectedly. And I want to talk about that a little bit. I'm sharing some of the hard parts of my caregiving journey with my parents. But some of the moments were the best moments we ever had. And some of the laughs that we had taking care of my mom were the hardest moments I've ever laughed in my life. It's really important to be cognizant of that and mindful of that in those moments. And given the circumstances, obviously I wish neither of my parents went through what they went through. My mom being so young and what she went through, ALS, is horrible. I wish that didn't happen. But that being said, my sister and I often talk about, given those circumstances, if we had to go through those circumstances, I wouldn't have changed anything because I was there for my mom. We laughed and we had, I think there's something about when we had some of the best conversations, some of the most heartfelt conversations. And laughs and jokes and all of that. And there was one moment that part of that taking time for yourself where my dad said to my sister and I, it was a Sunday, and he said, "You know what, girls, you don't have to sit here with your mom. She's okay. Go out to the pool, have some wine, just take that time for yourselves. We've got the walkie-talkies. I'm watching TV. And if we need to lift her, move her, toilet her, whatever, then I'll call you on the walkie-talkie." So my sister and I went out into the backyard. We were floating around the pool, sitting by the pool. We drank a bottle of wine. My sister grabbed the walkie-talkie, and remember, sarcasm runs in our family. And she's like, "Hey, Dad." And he came on and he's like, "Yeah, all still good in here." And she goes, "Oh, no, we're done our bottle of wine. Can you bring us out another one?" And my dad said, this is one of his lines, so sorry if this is offensive to anyone. He was like, "What? Oh, up your arse," he said. And that was, it'll be, my mom passed 20 years ago in a few days. So 20 years ago, and we still do Sister Sunday. Sometimes it's Sister Saturday, sometimes it's Sister Friday, sometimes it's all, but we still do that. And now our nieces join, sometimes our friends do, and we float around the pool and have that time together. So, and even with my dad, throughout his aging process, there's always a lot of laughs and the best talks. He was my advice giver. The last day of his life, that afternoon, I spent the whole afternoon with him. I had belly laugh. I mean, he was tired and I knew something was up, and he was the scratch ticket king, and it was Boxing Day. So he was in bed. He couldn't get out of bed, so nobody knew what to get him. So everybody got him scratch tickets. And his sarcasm, I was scratching them for him. He was too weak to scratch them. And I was all excited because his crossword one, it got a word. And I was like, "Oh, I got a word. And he just looked at me and he goes, "Yeah, you don't get," like, again, You can edit that out if I shouldn't say that. That was my dad. That was real. And I just started to laugh. And then I got 3 words or 4 words or something. And I got really excited thinking that we won big. And he just looks at me. Yeah, $5. Don't get so excited. Right. And he burst my bubble. But as hard as that day was, and when I do a podcast, when I have the courage to do a podcast on traumatic grief, because that was probably the worst day of my life, that moment I can take from that. And that was probably one of the best moments, right? So really focus on that and share those laughs and focus on those good moments while you're going through it too, not just after. Let go of perfection. You're not expected to do everything perfectly. There is no perfect. And doing your best in that moment, showing up for your parent, whether it's through the aging process or an illness, showing up for them, that's good enough. Embrace good enough with caregiving. You're not a medical professional. You are living your life and you're working perhaps, and you're raising a family perhaps, and you have friendships. So know that it's good enough. And honor your own aging process. Like I said, I mean, we're always aging, right? Even if you're 25, you're aging. But you're not just a caregiver, and you could be in your 60s or 70s or 50s or 40s. It doesn't matter. Honor that. You're a whole person, and you have your own needs and your own dreams, and you have your own limits. So remember and honor that as well. Just a few more small tools and strategies that lets us acknowledge what we can do and that we can't do it all. And that's okay. So prioritize self-care. I've said, to block out 10 minutes at a time, or, an hour if you can, but block out your calendar, like actually put it in your calendar as an appointment or something that is just for you. If it's a bath, okay. If it's a walk, if it's a movie, if it's lunch with a friend, put it in, even if it is 10 minutes with a book or a walk. Just put it in your calendar. Delegate. I've already touched upon this, but if you have siblings, ask for help. Don't stay in that role of being the responsible one. Ask for help. Share the load. If you don't have siblings or that's not possible, look for resources, local resources, community supports. There's no shame in asking for help. It actually allows you. Sometimes this is different. This is like just caregiver, but I have a lot of clients whose partners are ill and they're caregiver to their spouse or their partner. And I often say, use community resources, because it allows you to be their spouse, their partner, and not their caregiver, because that changes a whole dynamic in a romantic relationship, right? So reach out. There's no shame in it. Set boundaries. Practice saying, I wish I could, but I'm not able to right now. And that goes back to whether it's with siblings, other things in your world that people are asking you to do. Boundaries protect your energy and it protects your relationships. Try a ritual for release. Light a candle. Again, write that letter that you don't send. Take a breath and say, I showed up with love today, and that's enough. So instead of I didn't do this or I didn't do this, did you show up with love? That's enough. That might be all they needed that day. Before we sign off, I want you to remember that you're not alone in this, and your struggle is valid. You are not a horrible child if you don't answer your parents' 8th phone call when it's dementia and they're not remembering, or when you have a day to yourself and you're not going to see them. There is validity in that struggle. There is validity in feeling that and then letting it go. And I want you to remember that your efforts are enough. If you're feeling overwhelmed, reach out to friends. Reach out to professionals or community supports that you may have, community groups. They do have caregiver groups. Different communities have those. You deserve support too. So this week, I invite you to notice one moment where you showed up with love. Not what you did, what you didn't do, the appointments, all of that. I want you to recognize one moment that you showed up to your aging parent just with love. Just one. And let it be enough. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear your story. And you can send me a message, or you can share your thoughts for future episodes. You can comment. And if you know someone who is going through this journey, the caregiver journey, who needs to hear that they're doing okay, send this podcast their way. Let them know about it. Follow us on Spotify. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Thanks for joining me. Be gentle with yourself. And as always, take care of you.